Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Tuesday Talk with author and psychologist RJ Jacobs. He is a local psychologist practicing since 2003. He maintains a private practice in Nashville. Obviously, I just said local, focusing on a wide variety of clinical concerns. After completing a postdoctoral residency at Vanderbilt, he has taught abnormal psychology, presented at numerous conferences, and routinely performs PTSD evaluations for veterans. His novel, which he will be speaking about today, well, his first novel, And Then You Were Gone, was published in 2019, and his second novel that he will be speaking about is Somewhere in the Dark, that was published August 2020.
That's right, August 11th.
So please welcome RJ Jacobs.
Hi, good to see everybody. I know that the virtual format is kind of what we're all doing right now, so I'll be happy to be just engaging with you this way. I guess what I was going to do was just sort of talk a bit, and if anybody has any questions or wants to interrupt, I'd really encourage that. These things seem like they go a lot better if it's more of a dialogue, so please, as I'm talking, if I say anything that makes you curious or feel like you want to jump in and say something, please do. As Alex said, I'm RJ Jacobs. I'm a psychologist and an author here in Nashville, and I have two novels. My first one was And Then You Were Gone. It came out in 2019. And then my most recent one is Somewhere in the Dark. It came out in August. And I was going to talk a little bit about those and about being a psychologist and being a writer and how those things overlap a little bit, and maybe anticipate some questions along the way. I started writing when I was in college. I wrote a couple of short stories and even some things that I thought were novels at the time, but when you're starting out writing and you're 19 or 20 years old, you really just kind of write about what you know. And so I don't have a sense that that stuff was particularly interesting to many people, but I was pretty proud of it at the time and showed it to a couple of professors who I think were almost like, it was my first experience with having like editorial feedback. And I think they both sort of said like, this is okay, but you kind of need some work. But I kind of kept at it. I certainly enjoyed the process of writing and stuck with it a bit. And then I guess about halfway through college, I switched my major to psychology, essentially looking for something more practical to do or to study. But I kind of kept writing here on the side. And as I graduated and went into grad school, the writing went a little bit on the back burner, and it kind of stayed on the back burner as I was like making my way through finishing grad school, dissertation, doing a postdoc, and then ultimately starting a practice and starting a family. One of the hardest parts is having enough time to work on everything. So I guess it was about 6 or 7 years ago, I decided that if I was going to be serious at all about writing, I probably needed to get back to it. So I did. I invested in a laptop, same laptop that I'm speaking to you on virtually right now, and sort of rolled up my sleeves and started to work on a novel. The process of kind of going from just writing a manuscript to getting it published was something that I really knew nothing about, like as I was getting going. I remember I met with a friend of mine who had published a book. She's a local author, and I remember saying to her, she said, "So you have a manuscript?" And I said, "No, I think this is a finished novel." And she said, "No, trust me, it is a manuscript." And I don't think I had a sense of just how much was going to get edited and changed. So it was like she explained to me at the time, there's an enormous difference between writing and publishing. And that was something that I've kind of come to understand. Luckily, I connected with a really awesome agent Rachel Eskram Courage is my agent. She's with Folio, and she has really helped me to kind of navigate some of the challenges about understanding like how things get published and just how everything works, how rights to things get sold, and what happens after you finish a manuscript, and the process along the way. The fun part is sipping coffee on a Sunday morning and working on a first draft. Some of the edits are a little bit more challenging sometimes. One of the other like challenging parts, particularly right now, is about discoverability, because there's so many books, and with there being so many events that have been either canceled this year or reimagined in a virtual format, it's a little bit harder or trickier to kind of get your book out there. So people are having to be creative. Luckily, people are still reading. That's one advantage that authors have over musicians and even like visual artists. Here in Nashville, of course, I know a lot of musicians. I'm sure everybody in the audience does too. And they're having a much tougher time, at least right now, because it's impossible to play shows, or they're having to be super creative about streaming stuff. And it's a very different world in 2020. So luckily everybody's still able to pick up books and read, but it's been interesting for sure. One question that I get sometimes is about what it's like to be a psychologist and a writer, and how those things can interact. And something that a lot of people seem like they wonder is, do I get ideas for stories by talking with my patients, and how often does this come up? And in fact, it very rarely comes up. It feels like sort of a different part of my life. And most of the time it just has absolutely no relevance at all to why somebody would be in my office. So most people who come in and talk with me or do work here in my office probably don't have any sense like I write mysteries at all. I will say that sometimes, like talking with somebody, it can kind of get your imagination going if you hear something particularly interesting. And some story ideas, it's not like it's a transcription of what somebody's saying, but there are times where you think, it kind of engages the curiosity or creative process. And you start to think, what if it was like this and not that? What if this changed in that story? And wouldn't that be interesting? There's a part of psychology actually called narrative therapy that, essentially takes someone's story, the story of what happened, and kind of reimagines it in a way, and uses that reimagining as kind of a cognitive technique to help someone acquaint themselves or re-understand the circumstances and their role in what's happened. And in some ways, those things are kind of slightly related. That's a way that writing actually, I think, makes me a better psychologist, is by understanding the narrative and sort of the arc of a story, and how people can be sort of characters in the story. I think one of the other like really tough parts is about just finding the time to do it. Like I was saying before, sometimes people will say, "Oh my gosh, when do you write? Like, when do you have time to do it?" And sometimes people mean that in a way to ask, like, what's your process? What's your style like? Are you a morning writer, or do you set aside time? And some people really just want to know, like, how do you even find time to do it? And that's one bit of advice that I think I give to people who are just starting out, is to try to make some time to do it almost every day, even if it's 30 or 45 minutes. I remember about 2 years ago, I was working on Somewhere in the Dark, and I was literally sitting in the dark because my daughter was cheerleading for a basketball game, and I had to wait until that game was over so I could pick her up. And there was just not going to be time after that really to work on my story, but I hadn't done anything creative that day. So I was sitting in the gym beside her gym, literally typing notes onto my iPhone uh, to try to email to myself later. And I remember at the time thinking, this is probably what it takes. You know, if you're dedicated to getting stuff like this done, there's going to be moments where you have to write notes to yourself on an iPhone and email it to yourself later. So sometimes it's about really trying to be kind of creative about the time. A lot of times though, like I work on it in the evening. My son is about to turn 16 and my daughter's about to turn 14. And so they have plenty of homework to do. And in some ways it kind of feels a little bit like that. Like we all come home, have dinner, and then like we all essentially do our homework. It works okay. They open up their laptops and do their stuff, and I do mine too. Sometimes people ask me a little bit about getting rejected and how that is, and about feedback about my writing. And one thing I'll say about it is that when it comes to being in any kind of creative pursuit, really the rejection is part of it. And you just really kind of can't take it personally. That's one bit of advice that I got. And it's just kind of how it is. It is, I was alluding before to the difference between writing and publishing, and it is kind of part of that. It's not personal, you know, and publishing is a business. And those publishing houses really see what you're doing as a product, and it has to be a product that will make money, or they anticipate will make money. And if they don't, it's not personal, but you know, there are a lot of people who want to tell stories and sell them, and they have to make some tough decisions sometimes. So especially getting started, there is a fair amount of rejection involved. I used to think, I guess when I first started out, I thought, geez, if you just write a good enough story or a good enough book, it will capture attention, and that's really all you need. And that's about half of it. The other part is the kind of marketing piece. They say that to be a writer in our kind of current age, you have to be writing one book, editing another book, and promoting yet another book, kind of all at the same time. And so it kind of takes all three things, I think. In terms of the criticism that you get, or the like feedback you get, you know, for the most part, I really welcome it. I think most writers try to have a good relationship with the people who are reading their stuff. And there's so much to read out there. It's kind of a compliment if anybody has picked up your book and takes the time to look at it at all, because people are busy, and you know, you've spent a lot of time working on it, but there are a lot of other options about you know, things that they could be watching or other books that they could be reading. And so I feel complimented anytime someone just takes the time. Some of the criticism is sort of better than others. You know, sometimes people will say, I don't like your book because the main character had the same name as my ex-boyfriend. And, you know, what are you going to do about that? Sometimes, you know, you have to really lean into the criticism a little bit. And there are things that are valuable to understand about, you know, ways that you could tell a story better. And if you can kind of check your ego at the door and listen a little bit to what people are saying, sometimes it comes across in a way that you can kind of digest it, and, you know, perhaps refine your craft, make you a little bit better of a writer. I think this sort of secret to getting going with stuff like that is to have a process, whether it's in the evening or the morning, or, you know, or whatever time it is, but a process that you enjoy and could replicate over and over and over again. Because especially working on something that's novel length, you know, it's not going to get done very rapidly. the estimates on how long it takes really kind of depend on the writer. Some people write really pretty quickly. There's a writer in town named Maria Fry, and she'll write 6,000-7,000 words in a day. And I kind of don't know how she does it, but she's excellent at what she does, and she can do it very rapidly. You know, for me, sometimes 1,000 words a day, sometimes it's as little as 500, but it's about being consistent and about kind of enjoying that process as I'm kind of going along. So I have the 2 books out now. I'm almost finished with the first draft of the next book right now, and I'm pretty excited about it. It's about a former horror movie actress who has to go in search of her family, and as she does, she starts to suspect that the circumstances of the emergency resemble the film she starred in. And I grew up in Florida, and right now it's set in Florida. As I said, a lot of things change before it gets published, but it's been fun to work on. I think it'll be kind of fun to read. The book that's out right now, or that came out in August, is called Somewhere in the Dark, and it's about a country singer who goes into the woods to meet her lover and does not return. And the main suspect is her #1 fan, who there is plenty of reason to think that she committed the crime. But since she is such an involved fan, she has a lot of insider knowledge about this person who has been killed. And her and the detective become kind of an unlikely pairing in trying to unravel the case. So it was set in Nashville, and there's parts of it that are set pretty much across the street over in Warner Park. And people who live in Nashville have had a fun time seeing the places represented in the book, or they'll say, "Oh, I recognize that spot." Or even the first book was also set in Nashville, and I can't tell you the number of people who said, "Oh, that Starbucks, I have been to that Starbucks." So sometimes it's fun. A lot of books are set in New York or Los Angeles or in other parts of the world, but as a city, Nashville has a real identity, and in some ways, it's kind of a character in itself in the book. So I definitely had fun working on it here. I'm trying to think of what else I have to say. That's probably the extent of my opening remarks, but Alex said that maybe there would be questions, or if anybody has something that they want to ask, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to comment that I really enjoyed how Nashville is, like you said, a character in the book, but not too much. Sometimes I feel like they try to like throw in like every random thing they possibly can.
Yeah.
So it's just the right amount. So I've enjoyed that, and it's really great to hear about your writing process. We also had Rhea Fry speak here, and she did discuss how she writes a ton of words, as well as JT Ellison, which brings to mind there's just so many great authors in Nashville. It's very cool. We do have one question right now, and I just want to encourage people who are watching this to type your question in the comment section now. But is your characterization of the professor anti-Semitic?
Is the characterization of the professor?
That was the question. Yeah, do they maybe mean the psychologist? I'm not sure, but was someone anti-Semitic in your book? Supposed to be?
I don't know. I don't understand that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it's just not a question that I understand. I know.
Okay. Well, was Jesse Jewish? I was wondering that because the last name sounds a little Jewish, since we're the Jewish Community Center.
Oh, the main character in Somewhere in the Dark, Jessie Duvall.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I hadn't pictured her that way. It was an interesting development in that character, in that originally I had conceived of her as a male. But as I kind of got to know the character and wrote the story a little bit more, it seemed like it would be more interesting if it was from her perspective and she was who she was.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I don't know what that question was about then. But you also, I think you said that you originally went to college to be an author. That was your original major?
Yeah, originally I was an English major.
Okay. And then you switched to psychology. So that's very cool. I also think about, what's her name? That author that always, like, I know authors research their, do a lot of research. What is that? She writes like a million books a year as well. She wrote that, like, My Sister's Keeper, and she always, Jodi Picoult.
Okay, yeah.
Picoult is
I
how
recognize
it's pronounced. So she's just she's a popular author. She's been writing for a long time, but I know that she always will meet with someone who is in her books are very well researched. So I think it's interesting that you write, I guess, would you consider your books like psychological suspense?
Yeah, psychological suspense is the sort of subgenre that they're in.
Right.
The research is really some of the most fun stuff that you do. And a lot of times you kind of don't know what you're going to be researching until you start writing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you realize the gaps in your own knowledge. And so this happened a lot in the first book, where there was just police procedural stuff that I had absolutely no idea about.
Right.
And so I got lucky, and a friend of mine is a detective, and I got to take him to lunch a couple of times and ask him questions.
That's very cool. Yeah, I'm sure that really helps with developing that character. I do have a clarification about the original question. In your first book, and then you were gone, the biochemistry professor.
Okay. Or okay. I know the character now. And the question is the character, is he anti-Semitic?
That was the question. I assume that he wasn't.
I didn't think of the character that way.
Yeah.
As being an anti-Semite at all.
It's interesting. We sometimes
I don't I'm sorry I don't have a better answer, but that doesn't connect.
Well, I think that's actually the best answer, is that he wasn't. But it's interesting when people can find traits from a character that are maybe implied and not necessarily what the author
I see, yeah.
intent was. Yeah. I also thought it was like you we're talking about promotion. There's just so many books out there. Sorry, someone was knocking on my door. I see there's a lot on Bookstagram now, and there's Goodreads, and there's all these, author, there's a lot. I feel like a lot of books become popular because whatever, Goodreads promotes it or something. And I would think that would be really difficult. And I forgot where I was going with that because my door was being knocked on. But do you do all of that on your own? Like your own publicity?
Yeah, I mean, a good bit of it. Some of getting the word out is, I think there's a little bit of trial and error as you're getting started. And, I don't think I had a clear sense at the beginning about what was going to be effective marketing and what wasn't. I definitely have gone to book events where there's 2 or 3 people sitting there and, have driven all day to be somewhere. And, it can be just a little discouraging. At the same time, you can really connect with the people who are there. Sometimes that you end up having a much deeper conversation with a smaller audience than you would. This year, a lot has been virtual. I think people are kind of scrambling a little bit to try and find the most effective ways. There is Goodreads. Instagram has been great. One of the things about that world, that sort of publishing book mystery writer world, is that you just meet people who have really similar tastes in things, really similar habits, writers with other similar habits. And it's kind of amazing, actually, to connect with somebody who works on stories in exactly the same way that you do, thinks about things in very similar ways, who you would have never met if it wasn't for that community. And so we were at a mystery writers conference last October 19. And I remember, like, there was one question from it, I was on a panel, and one question was about style of writing. And I remember thinking that the previous two people on the panel who answered that question basically took my answer. And I kind of had no idea what to say because I was just surprised at the similarities. These are people who I had never met before, but their approach was so similar to mine. It's very cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also, sorry, just want to make sure, I just want to put out a last call for if anyone does have any other questions or comments, because people are watching this live, but sometimes people will email me later on. So if you have a question, if you're not watching this live, RJ, I may email that to you, but it's
Yeah,
very
please do. Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to take any follow-up questions.
great. I had one more question, which is we do have a an author series here at the JCC, and our first author was a couple of weeks ago, and obviously virtually. She said that she's written several books, and she said that she has not written anything since March because she said that among her other author friends, she just has not felt inspired. I know you said you are writing another book, but have you felt that way?
At times, I think that particularly early on when the pandemic began, I think there was some sense of like no one kind of knew where the bottom was or just how far things were going to go. And so the fear and uncertainty around that, I think, kind of chewed up a lot of bandwidth, and some of that would have been used for creativity. So I definitely relate to that about not feeling inspired. And then over the summer, there was a lot of stuff going on in the country. A lot of civil rights stuff related to Black Lives Matter, and it was very hard, to pay attention to that and then just shift gears really quickly into creative pursuits. Sometimes, it certainly took a moment for me, and I think for a lot of people who were trying to create stuff, to digest what was happening in the country, and also then find some way to continue moving forward creatively. It was a challenge. All of the stuff around the election, it's been quite a year. And so one thing that I've heard writers say that have successfully done that is that they have seen their creativity as a refuge from all of that anxiety and stuff going on. And I think when people have been able to do that, they have been, maybe had more space to be creative, but it's hard. It's hard.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that. Well, I think reading for me and for many people has been a refuge, but I would imagine having to come up with, creative storylines and, write a book would be difficult. So I'm looking forward to your next one. When is your next book coming out?
There's no date for it yet.
Okay.
So I would estimate it would be about a year from now.
Okay. Well,
so you've got plenty of time to finish Somewhere in the Dark.
Yes, and then I will read And Then You Were Gone. So thanks for taking the time to do this. And there are no more questions on here, even though there are viewers. So thank you to everyone who's watching. Again, thank you, RJ Jacobs. I look forward to having you here in person one day when we can do that.
I'd love to. Alex, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
So long.